help us through. And I would ask you while I'm doing that, if you'd like to if you'd like to change your name and create your, so sorry about that. There we go. The music was good when we needed it. If you'd like to change your name and share your pronouns, if that's something that is important to you, please feel free to go ahead and do that. If your name isn't in front of your little picture there, if maybe it's a number or your phone number, you may want to change that out too, so that we know each other by name. So welcome to From Reflection to Change, Understanding and Navigating Implicit Bias in Our Work. So here's what the morning is going to look like. First of all, Mary or Annie, can you give me a thumbs up if my screen is visible and everyone can see it? Great, wonderful. So here's what we're going to get into today in various forms or another. We're going to do some level setting first and just kind of align our minds together to be able to explore the topic. And then we're going to look at implicit bias as a concept and what it means. We're going to look at how it shows up as well in our work and in ourselves personally. We're going to look at the origins of implicit bias out of the structure of social power here in our society. So we're going to analyze power and look at how we get our implicit biases out of that. And then we're going to look at implicit bias in our work specifically, and I'm going to share a framework with you for being able to manage it as we start to recognize it and notice it more and more. And then finally, you're going to have some time, both individually and in smaller groups, to be able to set some intentions for being able to take this work back to your place of work and continue it and grow it and elevate it in your workspace. And then the final thing that we would ask you to do today is to take a few minutes and fill out the very short evaluation. We plan these as we roll through each year, and your evaluations help us to really know what the population wants and needs. All right, so that's what the morning is going to look like. Before we go further though, as we're level setting, it is extremely important to acknowledge people and people groups. And by no means is this everyone that needs to be acknowledged. And so we're going to hold some space at the end of this for other people. But these are some key groups who have helped to build our society and who are part of that whole structure of power one way or another as we look at that, that we're going to talk about a little bit later. So these acknowledgements are evergreen. And by evergreen, I mean always important, always valuable. It is essentially important to change our society that we make acknowledgements of people and people groups. That little quote there, equity is a paradigm that grows through practice. I want us to kind of lift that and keep that with us, because being able to move toward equality, toward equity, and on toward a liberated society, meaning liberated from race and racism and letting those things be determinants of how we function in society, it's more than heart change. If we wait on everybody's heart to change and for, leaders and power and people to say, oh, I feel terrible and you're right, change is not going to happen, as it hasn't happened. It really is about the practice. It's about doing it again and again and again, even when it doesn't feel right, until it begins to grow in us. And that's where heart change comes from. And so, excuse me, we're going to start shifting our paradigms to think about practice, which is the work that I do. How do we change our workspaces? How do we practice doing equitable things at work until it really takes seed in us? And so as we begin our time together today, let's acknowledge first First Nations people who occupied and stewarded our land, the land that we're living on right now, that we're breathing on, that we benefit from right now. As ancestors of slaves, as an African American, we came to land that had already been forcefully taken from Native First Nations people. And so we want to acknowledge those peoples and those people groups. We also want to acknowledge Chinese persons, groups of Chinese people who labored for inequitable wages and often free to build railroads from east to west so that America could be more and more and more settled. Groups of Chinese people did that work and built those railroads side by side with one another. And we want to hold space for that. Also Latinx peoples who have in the past, previously, historically, and continue to do hard labor in multiple ways for very low wages and sometimes for free, for other opportunities and other rights to have a place to sleep, to have a place to live. They're not paid for their work and doing that hard labor. And we want to hold space for that. And finally, I want to hold space for women, those of us who are female, and especially women of color, as we identify ourselves who have historically and continue to work in child and family serving jobs, in social work, in early care and education, in nursing, those types of jobs, often for very low wages and sometimes for no wages. There are people who have family child cares in their homes. There are people who are doing work that serves family and children, and they are not taking salaries for those. And we also want to hold time for other people and people groups that you can think of. None of us, no one of us can think of everybody that has labored and been oppressed in our country under the structure of power, but you can think of some other ones right now. And we just want to take a quick few more seconds to acknowledge those people. Thank you. So let's level set a little bit and practice. Let's get our brains flowing. Some of you may have been up already working early this morning. Maybe you're already in your offices working. But for some of us who are not and we're still on our first cup of coffee, let's just get our minds going and grease those wheels a little bit. So I'd like us to think about movement. This background that you see, I chose specifically because it represents movement for me. And so we're going to take about 30 seconds and just look at this background, and through the lens of movement or thinking about movement, go ahead and pop into the chat. How can you, what are some words, first of all, that you associate with movement? And you can put those in the chat as you think of them. And then how can you align the concept, the idea, the thought of movement with being motivated to learn and grow and change? So those are a couple things. Let's just take a few seconds and just check out this background and pop your ideas and thoughts into the chat. All right, I see them coming in. I'm gonna open the chat. It may open a box on your screen, but I'm just gonna. Oh, great words. Flow, energy, revolution, growth, exercising and working out, adjustment, being flexible. Someone brought up pain, really important. Yes. Integration, different perspectives, really great words. Flexibility and growth, change, passion. Someone brought up passion. Dancing, opening of our minds. Those things fit together really well. Dancing and opening of our minds. Wonderful job. Thank you so much. As you think of more, go ahead and put those in there, and we're just going to move forward. Thank you for doing that. A little bit of practice for our brains. So who am I? Anyway, why am I qualified to talk about race and race equity? And today our topic is implicit bias, all the things that jazz me. I think you all should know this is absolutely my pair of shoes here. This is my cup of tea. When we're talking about things that grow and expand people, and we're talking about concepts that have previously not been able to be discussed in our work, in our workplaces, in public, and now we're at a place where we want to engage and we want to talk about it. You guys, you have the right one here. You people, you folks, you have the right one. And so who am I? What qualifies me? Here are some things about me, and you can just kind of read through this and I'll share a little bit that qualify me to be able to share with you. And you have things about you that qualify you to be here, the work you're doing and the person that you are. So we're here together on a learning journey. And so one of the things that I hold beloved to myself is that I am a love child. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember the song Love Child by Diana Ross. Probably not many of you, but Mary and I are, we're old enough to remember that song. And there's a lot of pain in that song for Diana Ross, and a lot of, or the subject that she's singing about, a lot of ridicule. But for me, that was something that was held dear to me. My family told me my story from birth. Every time I can remember, my grandmother, my uncles, and they all said, you are wanted. My mother was a migrant from the South part, from Arkansas, the granddaughter of sharecroppers. So she was agricultural. She was a farmer when she came here to the big city. And my mother met my father, who was an immigrant from Central America, from Latinx Central America. And they fell in love, as people do. And I was always wanted, I was planned. And that's something that I held on to as I went through traumatic experiences in my early childhood. My father eventually was not in the home, and that was traumatic for me. But they never, ever forgot to tell me how much I meant to both of them. And so that's important. And that's a quality that qualifies me to be here. I was formed in the culture of American Blackness. I am African American. Sometimes I identify as Belizean American. But I was born and raised right here in America, and I was formed in that culture, and I was shaped in the culture of the Black church. I come from 5 generations of Black Pentecostalism. And that is a place where I really feel like I belong. When I'm there in the presence of other people who share that culture, there are no, there's just abandon, no fears. I don't have to be careful how I look, what I say, what I do. We're just there together. So that's one of the places among many that I belong. I really thrive when I'm around children. As you can see from that picture, those are 2 of my nieces and 1 of my nephews who had traveled here a couple years back from Las Vegas to visit with us, and they had never been to a Golden Corral. And we think like Golden Corral, when they said that's where they wanted to go, I was like, well, okay. Best time. We had the best time chopping it up there in Golden Corral, as you can see, and becoming the center of attention. And that's one of the places where I really thrive, in the company of children and around my family, where I feel safe and accepted and loved, and in the experience of Black joy, which really encompasses a lot of humor and a lot of music and a lot of silliness. Those things are places where I actually grow and I thrive. One of the things I am concerned about is the impact of the political times that we're living in, and things that are politically motivated, causing adults to be more and more dysregulated, as we see in our country, and the impact that's having on babies and young children who were born in this time. So pandemic babies who haven't seen other people's faces besides their family without masks, and who don't know how to necessarily read facial expressions and body language, because everyone's tense and everyone's concerned and everyone's distant from one another. That's something that concerns me. And my work is early childhood education. I started as an assistant teacher way back in the dark ages in 1990, and just kind of worked through the field, and had an opportunity to spend time in everything from Head Start and early Head Start and preschool for all, and demonstration schools and laboratory schools. I have taught and continue to teach on the college and university level. And now I consult. I am an early childhood education trainer and professional development consultant. And I try to help people who are in this field as well, in the industry, and help build the workforce. So those are a few things about me. Now you should feel like you know me pretty well. And those are the things that make me qualified to be here with you, just as you are qualified. So it's your turn. We're going to take a few moments, and I want you to think about who you are in that way. Not necessarily what you do first. We have been taught professionally to define ourselves about what I do. So by what I do. So if I were to say, Annie, tell me about yourself, she'd say, well, I'm Annie Behrens and I teach at blah, blah, blah college, like almost immediately, probably. But we're going to shift that and turn that on its head. Who are you really? Where do you thrive? Where do you belong? Who do you know that brings joy and love to you? So you're going to have an opportunity to do that. I just need to check this next slide to be sure that, I did not put us in groups here. Okay. So we're going to take 1 full minute here because we have the time, and just think about who you are. And I'm going to ask you to prepare yourselves to go into breakout rooms. So Mary, Annie, whichever, this is going to be our first chance to go into breakout rooms. We're just gonna have 3 minutes in the rooms. Everybody will not get to share, but you'll always be able to think. But if there's someone in your room who would like to share who you are and who you are really in your room, that would be great. And so we can go into rooms now, and we'll do that for, we can have 3 to 4 minutes, Annie.
Yeah, sorry, I just need a minute to set it up.
Sure, no problem. This is our minute to think. Ooh.
So it's not appearing the way I'm typically used to breakout rooms showing up. So I don't know that I'm gonna be able to do it for this breakout room.
Okay.
If we can maybe just move to the chat for this one and I'll figure it out for the next one.
That's fine. And it may be because I'm sharing. So I need to remember to stop sharing.
Okay.
And then you probably will be able to see it. But for this one, we can go ahead and move to the chat. We have a couple things we want to do the chat anyway, so that'll be fine. So for this first one, go ahead and put in the chat just list a couple of the really interesting things about you. Things that are really you. Oh, some good ones are really coming up. A dog mom. Absolutely. I'm a pet mom too. And a tattoo enthusiast. And make sure after you pop a few in that you get a chance to scroll through and read other people's. The smile of a child. Someone's a dreamer. Beautiful. Anchored in family and faith. Absolutely. Esperanza's open to experiences. Great ways to introduce yourselves. Imelda is a mom above all and a believer in change. Marcella is a fighter. I am loved. Oh, and a happy grandma. So am I. Love that. As you're looking at these, look for identifications that you share, that you also. That's how we connect with one another. Candy loves to be kind with others. Rhonda is an outside person. Wonderful. Sports, great. You all are really, really good at this. Good job. Keep them coming. And as we move forward, I'm going to ask you to add something to the chat. So we'll do that with this slide. So I'd like you to think about and then share in the chat on one of these. You won't be able to get to all of them, but it's again, practice in introducing yourself in ways that help us really connect on the human level and help people really get to know you. So I am, I believe, I'm concerned about, I hope, or something else. What else? Maybe something you want to share with us. So we'll take just about another 30 seconds to 45 seconds, and you can answer any one of those that speaks to you. I believe in helping others thrive. Wonderful. See some hopes coming through. There's a concern about climate change. And another concern. The mental health of the new generation, absolutely, and their abilities to connect. So some concerns are coming through, some beliefs. We can all make a difference with a simple hello. I share that belief, absolutely. Beliefs in kindness. More concerns about climate change. Catherine believes anyone can master mathematics. I wish I knew you when I was trying to come through college, because I did not master mathematics all the way through. That's a great belief to hold. So important for people who identify, children who identify as female too. We don't always get that belief. Someone believes in self-care. Here's some hopes coming through. Wonderful. Lots of beliefs, lots of hope. Thank you so much. And you can always keep those going as we move forward. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate that moment of vulnerability where we had to kind of put ourselves forward. That's not always easy to do, but I appreciate you doing it with us. So agreements in these types of groups, we always do a lot of agreements often and try to come to a place where we can build community together and we can share in that community. And we're going to hold all of those agreements that we're used to, that we're kind to one another, that we keep our cameras and our cameras on and our mics muted and all those important things that help us be community. But these are the ones that I'd like you to agree on with me today, okay? There is no guilt. Often when we talk about issues of oppression and issues of othering, it can be very, very difficult for people who identify as white to be in those conversations and not feel guilty and not feel like, well, what the heck? You know, I didn't choose to be white and everything's my fault. I want to raise that and recognize that that's a tough and tight space to be in. That is not what we're doing here today. We are allies together. It takes all of the people to change a society. And so there is no guilt here, no space for anyone feeling guilty or feeling shamed about who you are. Whatever your identity is, it's welcome here. You're in the right space and everyone's identity is valued. And so there's no fear. Say what you need to say. There was a popular song out a few years ago, say what you need to say. I can't promise that what you need to say won't hurt someone else, or what someone else says won't hurt you. That's why you don't see anything here about a safe space. I can't promise you safety. No one in this space can, emotional safety. But this is a brave space. You see that hashtag brave down there? Be brave, say what you need to say. It's okay if someone gets hurt because we can repair harm. We don't want to intentionally hurt people. But if you say something that unintentionally hurts someone else, we can repair the harm. That person can bring it up privately or in the public domain here, and we can work with fixing it. If we don't say things, we won't know how to grow along with one another. So please don't have any fear to share your thoughts and your ideas. And please, no excuses. Not just, I just sit back and watch because I don't know. Blah, blah. Excuses keep us from doing our best work. So no guilt, no shame, no fear, no excuses. If you can agree with these and be in this brave space with us, go ahead and give me one of your reactions. Anyone, a celebration, a heart, a thumbs up, a hand clap, not the hand clap for me, but for our agreements, go ahead and put that up. And I want to make space for people, excuse me, I'm seeing them coming through, great. For people who can't agree, or there's something here that you're just not there yet, I'm okay if you don't put anything up. And if you'd like to private chat me in the chat or chat us all to talk about why you don't agree, we're open to that as well. All right. Some reactions are coming up. Great. Thank you very much. Now, while we are getting into our topic here, I just want to remind us that I won't be able to see the chat, but we will stop for questions. And Annie and Mary are both monitoring the chat. So if you have a question or a comment, feel free to put it in there. I won't be able to see it and address it until we stop for the questions and answers section and comments section. All right, let's move forward. We are in our intensive number 1. So get a good stretch in, get yourself comfy in your chair, feet grounded to the floor, because we are about to get into this work. How do I know about implicit bias? It's in my work, you're telling me, Crystal, but how do I know? How do I even know it's there? How do I know about it? Let's find out. Let's deconstruct the topic first of all. And this is a primer. If you know this stuff and you've dug in really deep, just bear with us. There are people here from all different, walks of life and areas. Sometimes we think we understand a thing and we don't. So let's just walk through it a little bit. Let's talk, God bless you. Let's talk about what is implicit bias. One of the first and most important things to know is that implicit bias goes by a few other names. Unconscious bias. Now I hear it's been named uncalled for bias, meaning that it's not necessary in the space and no one meant for it to be there. It was uncalled for, but it's there. So we'll refer to it mostly as implicit and unconscious bias for our work here. So here's a technical definition pulled straight from the dictionary. Implicit bias is a bias or prejudice that is present but not consciously held or recognized. That's the technical definition, one of many. It's a bias that's present or a prejudice, but it's not consciously brought to the forefront or even recognized. We move through our implicit biases automatically without even recognizing that they are present, which is some of the work we're going to be doing today, how to recognize it and how to call it up and examine it. In plain language, it's just unproved assumptions we make about people or people groups. Another way to say unproved is unsupported, unfounded. There is no research that would show that people with disabilities take twice as long to walk across the street, but in our mind, we might be like, oh, he's on crutches, it's gonna take him forever. The light's gonna turn green and I'm not gonna be able to go. Like, we think of all sorts of stuff like that automatically in our minds, moment by moment. And so unconscious bias is unproved assumptions we make about people and or people groups. Why do we have them? Where do they come from? We're going to get into that. But the word implied is really important here. Implied means that these biases are suggested, but not directly expressed. What we still need to find out is where and how are they suggested? Where are we absorbing them from? We absorb implicit biases from the world around us, and we'll look more closely at that as we go further. So these are your definitions of implicit bias. Take another few seconds and look over those. Not too far. Okay, so let's take 1 minute here. And we're going to drop some comments, some common biases in the chat. And these don't have to be your biases. So you don't have to expose yourself. You don't have to be like, oh, I'm biased against people with glasses. Just some you've heard, some you know about. Go ahead and put those in the chat. Oh, there's a great one. Women are bad drivers. Too emotional. I'm going to drop one that I have. They're coming through. Take a look at a few of those. Teenagers are lazy. Men can't cook. Yes. Oh, there's a great one. Boys will be boys. Boys can't cry. Good ones, good biases. And what are some of the biases that you may hear in the work that you do? Again, you don't necessarily need to expose your workplace, but what are some of the ones you hear in the type of work that you do? Oh, people on government aid are lazy. Absolutely. Very young children aren't really learning. Families don't want to participate. Wonderful ones coming up. Wonderful. Yes, I didn't sign up for therapy. Babies don't remember. Good, good, and keep them coming. It's important that we have practice hearing, attuning our ears to hear bias when it comes up, to see it when it's on a page, like when it's on an intake form, and to recognize it in ourselves. And so we'll have time, we'll do a couple more of these where we're practicing putting some biases into the chat so that they come up for us and other people can see them as well. Sometimes we hear things and we don't recognize it as a bias, particularly in our work. So for example, in my work with children and families, there are certain things that we have at the ready. So one of the things that we create is a community services guide for parents. And I don't know if they do this anymore, but we used to do it way back in the day. And the things that would go in that guide, when I went back and looked at it, as I started learning about biases, it gave such a message about the condition that we assumed that families were in. So we were giving people, things they need, like food pantries and diaper banks and things like that are important. But there was nothing else, nothing that we didn't have the local movie theater in there. We didn't have great restaurants in their community, like assuming that they didn't want to live a full life and didn't have the means to live a full life. We didn't have taxi services in there, just a book of things that you can get help because we think you're in this condition, domestic violence and all that kind of stuff. So it was not a complete community services book for a complete life in the community. And those things are fed by our biases in our work. Thank you for sharing those. Let's continue to go forward. Here's a little short video clip. I believe this one, maybe 4 minutes. It may be, don't hold me to that. I'm not going to tell you how long it is because I don't quite remember. It's still early for me. But here's a little bit of how implicit bias just works in society, works in our minds without our knowing it. I'm going to turn it on, and Annie or Mary, would you give me a thumbs up when the sound is right and you can see everything?
Are you seriously considering her as a candidate?
Just don't trust her.
She's a woman.
She's a woman.
This is a man's
She's
job.
clearly not educated.
Really not. Does she even speak English?
That's not me. I'm not like that. You call it an honest mistake. Science calls it a blind spot. Our unconscious mind is a mysterious and powerful thing. It makes 90% of our decisions without us even knowing it. Our brains are overloaded with 11 million pieces of information every second. Yet we can only process about 40 of them. So we're wired to make cognitive shortcuts, using past experiences to make assumptions. And you know what happens when we assume. Our unconscious mind can put us on autopilot, determining where we sit, who we eat lunch with, who we turn to for advice, and who we choose to offer a helping hand. Living our lives with blind spots can put us in a tunnel. Same point of view, same decisions, same outcomes. We can find ourselves trapped in the land of snap judgments and misconceptions. We've all been on both the giving and receiving end of blind spots. Think about it. Who's talented? Who's able? Who can I trust? Who belongs? We've all been there. Blind spots are part of the human condition. Our choices have consequences for us and the people we interact with. By accepting that blind spots exist, we can stop. Imagine what possibilities exist if we could do it all over again. Different perspectives, inclusive relationships, diverse networks, better outcomes, seeing people for who they really are. People like you, with unlimited potential. We all have blind spots. Once you accept that you have them, you can choose to do something about it. It's time to check your blind spots and focus on what's possible.
All right, thank you for taking a few minutes to watch that with me. What are some of your just initial reactions? And you can pop those into the chat, just things that this made you think about. And we'll take just some several seconds to get some of those. Blind spots are lack of information, absolutely. We make assumptions without even realizing it. Yes, assuming. Lean into things that surprise us. Good. They're tied to our own insecurities. We do a lot more assuming than we thought about. Perfect, great. So just a couple things. This helps us to kind of dig into this concept as we deconstruct implicit bias. First of all, this is another name for them, blind spots. And it's called that here by this particular sector of science because this is brain science. Often working with young children and families, we've gotten into the science of the brain and brain development and how that happens for children. And it happens without children doing anything to make it happen. It's just the experiences of their lives that grow these things in the brain. Our brains have evolved to the point that we can navigate the world and operate our world without using all of the energy and brain power it would take to stop and think about a thing. We would not be able to get through life at the pace that we move. So this is an evolutionary process of our brains that quickly scans situations, pulls information from the past that we have stored in our brains and applies it to what we see. So it's a blind spot. We may not even be picking up in that moment what we see in that moment. Our brain is working to go, oh, there's a face in that box, and I recognize that face as a white face, and she has long blonde hair and glasses, and immediately my brain goes to maybe an experience I had or something I heard and learned with about a person with long blonde hair and glasses, and I might immediately say in my brain, unconsciously, she's a snob. She's a snob, and that's going to change my behavior towards her. I'm going to say, hello, Annie, nice to meet you. May I help you today? What are you here for? Based on something that happened in a quick split second like that, as opposed to if she was someone that I identified with or looked like me, or I didn't have a preconceived notion, I might say, oh my goodness, Annie, I'm so glad you're here. We're going to work together today. That's so great. Come on in. Can I get you some coffee? Like, it happens just that quickly. This is the science of our brains. A key thing, the third key thing that this gentleman said here is that if we accept, and this is the no guilt, if we can accept that we all create bias, that it was given to us in our backpack of life when we were born here, then we can work to stop it, which is what we're doing today. We can work to manage those biases so that they stop showing up in our work practices and in our work behaviors. Clear? All right, let's go forward. And please remember, if you have other thoughts, go ahead and put those in the chat as well, because we'll have a chance to go through them. So this is a really important slide. This is another thing that we don't recognize because life happens so quickly. But implicit bias can skew negatively or away from certain people and people groups or toward them. So we can have bias that is positive in the mindset. It's not positive in its use, but it ascribes trust or honor or acknowledgement or privileges to certain people or people groups. And it can be directly tied to favorable outcomes for those people, favorable biases. Okay, so let's think about that. Bias can skew forward or backward. It can skew positively or negatively for people. So let's take another minute and think about those. What are some biases that are less recognized and they're favorable? And I use that with a quote because all bias is not good, but it ascribes some trust, some honor, some favor to certain people or people groups. Let's drop those into the chat. And I think you're finding out this is a workshop, not a sit and get. We are working and you're doing great, great work. Yes, white neighborhoods are the best to live and shop in. That's one. Suburbs are safe. Fairer skin is prettier skin. These are great coming through. Straight hair is elegant. This is a great choice of words, elegant. The city is unsafe. You are safe at home. All right. Wonderful. Keep them coming. So these are some of these favorable biases that we have. Let's get into a few more that work a little bit differently. Take a look at this slide here and think about if, when, and how you've seen some of these come up. Think about our attitudes and mindsets toward a British accent. How many times have we heard someone say, oh my goodness, that he's got a British accent and it's just so lovely, so beautiful, versus someone with a Southern accent. Men who are 6 feet tall or taller versus a man who's 5'6" or shorter. Women who are 5'6" or shorter versus a woman who's 5'8" or taller. Motorized mobility versus people using manual devices. So people who are able to have a motorized wheelchair or some other kind of high-tech support to get around when they have different abilities versus someone who's using crutches or a manual wheelchair. How about Ivy League education versus a local college or a community college, a state college? How about the favor and the favorable bias that's ascribed to people who have a degree, a traditional 4-year degree or more versus a certification? I think about it in my own field, early childhood education. Often when I'm working and consulting with people who are trying to start up a new business, they really don't want to call themselves a childcare center or a daycare center. They want to call themselves a learning academy, a child development center, early learning. They don't want to say daycare, childcare, because there's favor ascribed to learning academy and other words like that. What about a professor versus an adjunct instructor or an instructor? Where is the favor ascribed there, although the work is the same? And I can attest to that as an adjunct professor for years. Yeah, so it's important for us to think about biases as not just the negative ways we feel toward people, but where are we ascribing favor to people based on something about them? Again, another blind spot. All right, let's keep moving. So what are the origins of implicit biases? Where does this come from? Let's look at power in our society. Okay. So what we see here on the screen, we see some of the structures of some of the systems of our society, some of the structure. We see housing up there in the top corner. We see economy or banking, wealth. There we see a school district, education, public education. We see our scales of justice there, which are supposedly blind. So our judicial system, policing is in there as well. And we see healthcare and access to wellness. Some of the systems, not all of them, but some of the major systems that create the structure of our American society. So the important things to know here is that a society is shaped by its systems. So it's the systems that scaffold a society to be built around it. And those systems govern and run the society. And so sometimes they are actually systems of government, but there are other systems that govern how people get along and move through a society. Power and norms, beliefs, mores and values, they're most often implicit and they are reinforced by how our social systems operate. And so no one's standing on a corner every morning in our society. This does happen in other societies. In our society with a big bullhorn saying, we recognize, the supremacy of whiteness. We want to make sure you go through your day being governed by that. That's not how it happens here in America. We are free people. We can ascribe to a lot of what we want to, anything, almost anything and everything within the bounds of what is called legal. We can listen to and be a learner of anything and anybody we want. And yet our systems are structured in a way that it gives us the values, the norms, the beliefs, and the way we are to conform in order to be an acceptable member of our society. It's implicit. We absorb it from the moment we're born, from how we are cared for and treated in the hospital as newborns, for what services and opportunities we have as preschoolers and in our early childhood journeys, and what we're learning in our schools as we go through our elementary and middle years and on from there. We observe it. It's in the waters we swim in. It's in the air we breathe. And it's supported by the structures of our society. The most important thing to know about that kind of origins, that our social power creates implicit bias, is that people, all of us, we either tend to trust society systems implicitly. We don't question them. We believe they are here for our best. We believe they work for our best, or we fear them. And that's based on our experiences in life. So either way, they don't get questioned. And we're at a point in society now where we're starting to question our systems and question their structures and question why they operate the way they do. But for eons, no one did that. And if you really kind of look inside yourself and search inside yourself and say, how do I feel about, for example, policing? You're going to come, you either trust that institution implicitly or you fear it. And either way, you're going to respect it. Does that make sense? Whether you trust it or you fear it, you're going to respect it so that it's unquestionable. So one of the things that I share to help us see this is my experience at growing up as a child and officer friendly. Anybody here had officer friendly come through your classroom? Again, a lot of you are much younger than I am. Maybe they don't do that anymore. But in my public school classroom in a nice suburb on the North Shore of Chicago area, I was born and raised in Evanston and schooled by Evanston School District 65. We had a visit twice a year from someone called Officer Friendly. And the first time that happened, I lost my sugar in my kindergarten classroom. I was flipped out when this giant 6-foot+ gentleman in all of his garb with the gun and everything that he had in the late 70s, his hat on, full badge gleaming, walked into our classroom, and I could hear his black work shoes clicking on the linoleum, and it scared me. I was 5. And out of the safety of my family and in our community and in our neighborhood, we had learned to have an implicit fear of the police. Now, I did not live in a neighborhood with high crime. I did not live in a neighborhood where there was a lot of police activity, but I lived in a neighborhood where the police regularly patrolled our community and would say things. I had brothers who were Black males growing up, would say things like, make sure you're not hanging out on this street. Like the experience with the police, and then the absorbing from my community and neighborhood that police are to be feared and that you don't question them and you don't look them in the eye, like all of that. I knew that as a 5-year-old, and I flipped completely out to the point where my teacher had to remove me from the classroom. And my brother, we went to a school, my brother was in a few grades ahead of me, and he was upstairs, and they went and called my brother. And when my brother came down, he was able to comfort me. Remember, one of those places that I feel safe is in my family. And he was able to talk to me. And, you know, I remember it. I'm 53 and I remember it today like it was yesterday. He said, he's not here for you. He's not here for us. He's not. And I remember saying, well, he's not friendly. You know, why is his name Officer Friendly? He's not friendly. Now, he hadn't done anything to me. He had not been unfriendly. He didn't smile, but he was showing us that he was an officer of authority, like you teach little children. So he didn't smile, but that implicit fear was what made me respect police growing up. And it's important to know that we either implicitly trust or implicitly fear these power structures in our society. And out of this power structure is where our biases originate. Okay, let's move forward. I moved forward too far. All right. So now you're going to really do some work. You think you worked before. And Annie, this is a place that we are going to go to groups, and I'm going to stop sharing as soon as I put this down and I need to get the worksheet out. So let's start. What was one thing that came out of analyzing power for your group?
I can start just to get us going.
Thank you. Perfect.
So we talked a lot. We kind of started with the prompts and then we'd get off on, little side thoughts and conversations. But I think we started by defining power as kind of access to resources and kind of systemic access as supporting those power groups. We identified that there are many different power groups. So whether that's, men, and then the target group would be women, or, white people and people of color. So we talked a little bit about and I know Daniela brought up even like beauty standards. So like people who are defined as beautiful by society's standard versus everyone else. So we kind of like identified that as like there's different groups of power, whether even if we even brought up like religion, so Christians and everybody else. So that's who we decided society valued, was the people in those power groups. And then the target groups were the marginalized ones. And the power groups remain in power because of their systemic access to resources.
Wonderful, Carrie. You get the Get Us Started award for today. You get the Get Us Started reaction. So here it is. It's party for you. There it is. Thank you. Well said. Good thoughts. And I can already tell we're not going to get to 13, but we'll continue going. Let's do at least 2 more and see where we are. Who else has some highlights to share?
I can go.
Thank you.
So our group, we discussed that who is valued. It came down to people who have money, or education, urban versus rural. And the idea is that they came to be valued because they feel that they are where they are because of their ambition, grit, and persistence, rather than, and the assumption that it's a level playing field, rather than understanding that that same level of persistence is not always possible when you have far more challenges. But people who get where they are and who are valued have that assumption that it was because of their sheer hard work, they're being responsible, they're using the opportunities available to them that they got where they got. Versus people, but without even recognizing that it was not a level playing field ever.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nazish. Is it Nazish? Nazish. Thank you so much for bringing up the idea of the assumption of work hard. And we're going to see a little bit about that, or grit. You talked about ambition, when the same opportunities aren't even available for people who are working equally as hard, or could be. Wonderful concept. And there is a hand clap for you. And let's take one more. Who else would like to share their highlights? And you can drop them in the chat as well, because we won't get to every group, unfortunately. We're a big group, but you can go ahead and put them in the chat if your group didn't get to talk.
I could go. Sure. Ours, like one takeaway that we had kind of looking at that final question is that we felt like we rattled stuff off super fast. And then afterwards we introduced ourselves and we realized that we're all kind of in really similar fields. And we thought like that lens, of just working with young kids who often are from families that might be marginalized, or, just that lens just really influences how we look at things that might be different from others who aren't in that field. And so that was just really interesting to us, that we were really in agreement with a lot of the things that we were saying throughout this category.
Wow. Great point. And thank you for answering that final question about how difficult or not difficult it was to rattle off all the different things there. And there is your reaction. You got a good thumbs up. That's great. Thank you, everybody. Again, you can put the rest of your comments or another highlight in the chat, because we will be capturing these and we can extend the conversation beyond today through email and other ways to do that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and we're going to look at the structure of power in a formalized way. So this was your welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Let me share, hold on. Gotta move things out of the way here. Okay, there's your welcome back. And we're gonna look at this. Okay, Mary and Annie, can I get a thumbs up if you can see this slide? Great, thumbs up. So this is an activity that I actually do with groups when we're together in person back in the olden days before COVID, when we could get together in person and workshop things out. And we do this together on a whiteboard or on chart paper or something like that. But it's really, we do it big, large, like with butcher block paper, so that we can understand the impact, the bigness of systems on our navigating our world. And so let's just take a look at this, and I'm going to just walk through it and talk through it. If you have questions or thoughts, we'll have time for that coming up very quickly. But this is the power analysis, and this is a real thing. This is pulled from research and work, and you can Google it and find it in other places. So here in the green in the middle, right in here, we call it the green grass, where things are, is where society places its value and its privileges. I want to just say that none of this is exhaustive. Like, nobody who comes up with this can think of every single thing, but it is largely complete kind of for our society. And so society values males who are white, people who are over 50 but under 80. So over 50, you're right in that age where you can be trusted, quote unquote. But if you get to be, 78, 79, now you're a senior citizen, and we kind of know where society values our senior citizens. People who are clean cut, upper middle class and up, wealthy, formally educated, that means college degrees, traditional college universities, 4-year degrees, white collar employees, Christianity, people who are Christian, able-bodied, English speaking, heterosexual, people who are securely housed, cisgendered, good looking. Someone brought up that idea of who looks good, who's beautiful by society standards. Neurotypical, people who are typically developing in their brain development, and people who are suburbanites. That is largely where society places its value. If you look on the margins of that, on the outsides of that, in that kind of tan area, that's a supportive soil there. What systems support these values? Well, all of the systems that support our society: banking and economy, education, our judicial system, our legal system, the government, housing, policing, retail, who sells what to whom and at what prices. The media upholds this. Religion, which is here in America, it's the evangelical machine that propagates this, and healthcare. So some of our systems, there are other systems like transportation and things that we haven't listed here, but all of our systems kind of support with that good, rich brown soil, that green grass that's in the middle. Okay, so let's move to the margins, out in kind of the gray, cloudy area. Who's on the margins? African Americans and Latinx people and other non-white people, people of color, people who are perceived as non-white. And the reason we use white here is because it's less about immigration and more about who's immigrating. So immigrants from other countries, new Americans from other countries who are perceived as white, so Polish people, German people, people from Western Europe are perceived as white and can get into that green grass area much more easily, if at all, than people who are perceived as non-white. And so that's why we use that term, non-white there. Immigrants, undocumented people are in the margins. Children, how many of us know that children have very little to no power, which is why in some of our early childhood classrooms, we try to build that shared community in. Children have no power. Non-English speakers, women are marginalized. People who are uneducated formally, because there are people who have all sorts of education, but they may not have received a diploma, a degree, a certificate. Poor people, LGBTQA+ people who are living in that identity. Neurodiverse people, people of low income, people who live in the inner city. That term, inner city, in itself is a distinct and planned city development that happened back in the late 50s when suburbs were first being developed in order to move people without means and people who were non-white and non-white white collar into the cities. When they say inner city, it means they're away from the resources that are on the edges of the city. So here in Chicago, there's shopping, there's the lakefront is there. There are museums and art galleries and all those things. People who live deeply inside that have very little to no access to those things, and transportation is difficult and all of that stuff. So people who live in inner cities, non-Christians, people who are gender non-conforming, disabled or differently abled people, people who are unemployed, people who are housing insecure or unhoused. Those are the people in the margins, okay? And so then the next thing we would do is ask for people to share thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes about the people in the middle, in the center. And so that's kind of that yellow area up there. That's the sunshine that shines on that grass up there in the middle there. And we tend to think of the people in the middle as smart, trustworthy, energetic, hardworking, responsible, faithful, deserving, caring, meant to be leaders, just born leaders. We say that a lot, or they were meant to be, or they wouldn't be the leader. Sensible, and lots of other things. I just put a few there. And then we move out to the margins. What are our thoughts and attitudes and beliefs about people who live in the margins? That they're lazy, that they're unpatriotic, ungrateful, greedy, dumb, criminals. We often criminalize people and people groups, that they're rude, that they don't want to do better. They're given a lot of resources. We call them handouts, and they don't want to use them and do better. Unmotivated, selfish, pitiful. They can't be helped, just no help, no hope for those people in the margins. That they're sneaky, uncaring, irresponsible, and angry. So those are some of the societal thoughts and attitudes about people in the margins. And one of the key important things about this analysis of power here is that the overarching system that governs all this other stuff is actually capitalism. Racism, oppression, and othering is actually about wealth. It's about protecting money and things for people who are privileged. That really, everything is really actually about the bottom line. And capitalism is upheld by haves and have-nots. And then capitalism itself upholds the idea of who's valued and who isn't. So it's important to kind of examine that more in your own time and your own growth and learning about how our system is structured, because often we think that isms like racism, for example, is about not liking someone. It's about, we don't like people of color, and so we're going to treat them differently. When actually it's about protecting the wealth and the property of people. And none of us who are here today was alive when this was. So there's no guilt here. We don't have anything to do with this. We just live in it. We just received it. But the people who came up with this, and it was planned, needed to protect their land, their property, their wealth, and their things. And so therefore they had to create these ideas and thoughts and beliefs about people other than themselves. That's how that happened. And capitalism, because we are a capitalistic society, it upholds these values and beliefs, and it is upheld by these values and beliefs. So it's really kind of a vicious cycle that we're all trying to work together to dismantle.
Can I say something?
Yes. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to say, just to everyone who's listening, is that even if you are in the margins, not everyone thinks about us the same way, so we should not feel, I very strongly feel we shouldn't feel like a victim, that, oh, everyone is thinking of us so poorly. That's very important to self-esteem and our sense of well-being too, that there are people who are in positions of power and so on, who might not think of us like this. And I understand that we're saying systemically, but just on an individual basis, like, just so that we know that not everyone is like that. They're good and people too, and fair and just people too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nazish, for raising that. And it's important, you said it. We're talking about systems and systemic people. And again, The people who created this are no longer alive. They are dust in the ground. And so there are people who operate in positions of leadership who don't believe this way and who are working hard to dismantle this. But this is the system that we live in. And the research proves out that this is kind of how people navigate. But thank you for raising the idea that we don't want to approach everyone we meet as if they're white, for example, they think this way. We have no idea. That's a bias. That's an assumption. So we have no idea. Absolutely. I raise your point. Again, you know, systems are understood and able to be changed through looking at them as systems, not as individual people. So it's important to remember that, because individual people are all kinds of people. Okay, so take another few seconds and just look at this. This is hard work. It's difficult to understand, but it's a really good tool that you should use and keep with you as we're thinking about how we do our work. Who's in the middle in our work, and what is that upheld by, and who's out on the margins and on the end, and what is that upheld by, and what can we change about our work and the way we do, for example, intake forms based on this type of idea.
Crystal, I'm going to jump in for a sec. Tiffany, has your question been answered, or would you like to pose that?
Thank you, Mary, because I can't see.
Oh, I'm good. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. And we are marching toward a time of questions and answers too, where we'll be able to voice more as well. And okay, so let's move forward. Here are some key insights as we close down this first intensive for us to remember. And this is, again, more of what Nazish has been talking about. We are all part of the structure of our society, all of us. We've all been socialized toward ranking people, assigning worth, and working hard to be part of the worthy. We all cooperate together in that. And we all have implicit biases. We're all good people. That doesn't mean we're bad people or terrible people. We all have biases that come up. It's brain science. And it is not possible to be bias-free. And I want us to remember that. Sometimes we beat ourselves up and we try to do the most work on ourselves. It's not possible. We can't be bias-free. What we can do is manage those biases and continue to be good people in our workplaces and become better and better people. The key, as a gentleman told us on the movie, the video clip, is to acknowledge these points 1, 2, 3, and 4 and manage the biases. So those are some key insights that we want to keep with us as we are thinking about how to do this work. To kind of explode that out a little bit more, think about the place you work as a microcosm of our society. We're all where we work, and even our families where we live, they're little societies. And these microcosms are found in all sectors of society. So everywhere from government to early care and education to hospital work to whatever kind of work you do in religion and in faith, we're all microcosms of the society that formed us. And this is how we know that we do replicate implicit bias in our work, because the rules that we live by are the societal rules that were given us. Society reproduces our beliefs, our values, our norms through the systems that we absorb it from. Systems reward and punish conformity to those values. So, and reward and punish can be something as blatant as you go to jail when you have reached that third strike or zero tolerance or something like that, to just how you're perceived in society, in your workplace. Even if you are not what we call a team player, we've heard a lot of that, or you kind of go against the grain, your job, your workplace will let you know how far is too far, with reward and with punishment. Companies, corporations, organizations, agencies, we all operate inside the boundaries of our societal systems because we live here and we're bound by the laws, rules, and acceptances of our society. And finally, our workplaces where we work, again, are just smaller versions of society. And I say that with a positive, because that can sound negative, like, oh, well, we're all society, there's no hope. I say that with a positive emphasis, because when we know where something comes from, we can change it. When we accept it, we can change it. And it's okay to be a microcosm of society because we're in our society. What else are we going to be? And by changing our little microcosm is how we start to change society. So this is a good thing. And finally, so what are some ways we can manage our own biases in our work? First, we can learn to recognize them, which is what we've been doing some practice on, being reflective about our own thoughts and actions and how we feel and think about other people. We can acknowledge it. We keep saying bias is a reality, and it doesn't have to be about you being a bad person. It's not individual. We got this in our luggage when we got here. We can examine our biases. Where is this coming from? Why am I feeling this way? Often this is practice that I do. If I have a thought about someone, I'll stop and be like, now, why am I thinking that? Is this an experience I had? Is this something I've heard? Is this something I've seen in media? Or do I just think that? Examining it often gives me that pause to make it go away, and then I can deal with that person in a fair and equitable way. And then that's what we do. We actively counter it. We can talk with a trusted colleague. We can say, hey, I was thinking this way about, this person. What do you think about that? We can partner on our jobs, in our workplaces, to ensure that all of our actions, all of the things we do are equitable. And we can work with one another, and we're going to get some practice and planning for this, to evaluate and reevaluate how we did. How did we build relationships with other people, and to build relationships with people who are different than ourselves on purpose, so that we have a different lens. So learn to recognize it, acknowledge it, examine it, and then actively counter it. That's our first strategy for today. And we have arrived at the place, and I'm going to stop sharing and take us back to the big room. If there are questions and comments and answers, we'll do this for just about the next 3 minutes. And you can keep them going in the chat, because over the break, Mary and Annie and I will attend to as many of them as we can. But is there anything that someone's burning to ask about or talk about? You can just unmute yourself and do that. Okay. So if you're feeling ready or confident to have a break and then move forward with our learning, go ahead and give me a thumbs up, and I'll look across. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. All right, we're looking good. Remember, if you have a question, you can always come back and ask it. You can also put it in the chat, and we'll try to give you a thoughtful response. We're going to go now and have a 10-minute break, and I have a counter, so we'll count us down. You can go ahead and go off camera. Be sure on this break that you stretch, you hydrate, you don't keep looking at your camera. Look away from your computer and go renew your brain, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. We're going to go into our second intensive. So our first intensive was really intensive. Hopefully our second intensive will be, we're still going to do a lot of work, but we're going to kind of raise ourselves up out of the reality of our systems, which can make us feel, it can feel negative, and it's not intended to do that at all. It's intended to show us reality and give us some tools of understanding as we work to continue to make change in our workplaces and in society as a whole. And so we're going to pull up out of that a little bit, and we're going to go to a framework to help deal with and learn ourselves out of implicit bias in our work. This framework is called the 4 E's, okay? So if we learn the 4 E's, you will have a nice little toolbox for shifting the lens in our work and helping our organizations to continue to turn corners to the point where we are working with everyone on an equitable and liberatory basis, okay? So the 4 E's, we're going to get into this, are, and this is about implicit bias or unconscious bias or blind spots: to expect it, then expose it, explore it, and elevate it. That's the 4 E's: expect, expose, explore, and elevate. Let's take those one at a time, okay? I'm gonna move us over here while I'm working here. So the first E is to expect it. We want to resist the societal narratives that implicit biases don't impact our services. Oftentimes we say, I leave my bias at the door, or we don't work from a place of biases in this organization. Those intentions are absolutely valuable, absolutely real. And, but the way our work is structured can indeed indicate that there is bias in our work. And again, that could have been created long before we ever were staff members, team members, and employees at the organizations we work in, or even the work we do if we own our own business. For example, I am an entrepreneur. I have my own business, but because I'm a part of society, oftentimes there's implicit bias in my work, even as I am considering clients, working with clientele, different things like that. And so we want to resist the narrative that there is no bias in our work. We want to acknowledge that there is and know that it exists in every part of society. And we want to assume that if we look for it, if we observe, we'll recognize some bias in our work. I want to point out, it doesn't mean we're not doing good work. It doesn't mean we're bad people, bad team members, bad employees, and we're a bad organization or a bad company. Those things are completely separate. That's not what this is. It just means that the way our structures work are mirrors of the way society structures work. And there are probably places in there that we can make enhancements, we can make change, and we can open up access to what we do for more people in more ways. So number one is to expect that if we look for implicit or unconscious bias, we will find it. Let's go forward. When we find it, let's expose it. Once you notice it, bring it up. One of the things about othering and oppression and ism in our society is that it hides in plain sight. We are not trained to recognize it because we are basically good people. If we recognized it explicitly, we would want to fight against it and make change, most likely, which is what's happening now. A lot of fight for change is happening. And I'm excited and proud to be alive and a vibrant worker and participator in things that we're trying to change through the work that we do. But because it's hard to notice for us, it's hard for other people to notice too. So it's important that once we find implicit bias in our work, that we bring it up. And this is where we have personal bias and also where we see it in the very culture of the places that we work. You should establish a habit or a lens, I call it a tool in my toolbox, of scanning for bias. Just a quick like, let me look at this again. Or a quick, that's an interesting statement that I just made or that someone else just made. I wonder how we can kind of open that statement up and examine it. So you want to establish a habit of scanning and use the lens of implicit bias to ask questions. Ask questions about yourself personally. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Where did that come from? What do I have in my knowledge that supports this bias that's real and concrete? And also at the macro level, at the organizational, team, staff, colleague, and community level. So expect it, then expose it. And then your third step you want to do in this 4E framework is to explore it. Approach it with curiosity, inquiry. Do it like those of us who are in education maybe know about action research. It's research that you do on the ground, at the ground level. Like, let me make a quick checklist about this and ask some of my colleagues. Let me do a self-survey myself and see what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and how I'm operating based on this. So we want to take the negative feeling out of it, the bad feeling, like, oh my goodness, I'm a bad person and we're a bad team or we're a biased organization. You just want to bring curiosity to it. I wonder where this came from. I wonder why we operate using this particular form or this particular process. Approach it with curiosity. And then it may help to keep a journal, to take notes on your own personal growth as you explore that. It may help you to try to think about what's interesting and important in this thing you're examining that you want to bring up for conversation, maybe at your team meeting. Maybe you want to have a meeting with leadership. Maybe you're on a committee. Maybe you sit on a committee for change. Maybe you want to start a committee. There's all sorts of ways to bring it up, to be able to do it. Maybe your organization has a newsletter or an internal web process. Maybe you're on the intranets where you can talk about things with people. Maybe you have affinity groups. Do you see how many? There's all sorts of ways that our organizations approach these things already. And you want to use those tools in your toolbox to be able to explore these biases that you are finding as you scan the environment. And if you don't have a lot of those ways, now is a good time to approach leadership, or if you are leadership, to start them. Start a committee, start an affinity group, start a talk group, brown bag lunch. Again, all sorts of ways to explore where you're seeing bias. And finally, you want to elevate it. And by elevate it, I don't mean lift it up so that it happens all the more or that it becomes stronger. I mean, bring it up, and bring it up in the spirit of discussion, not debate. We're not blaming anyone. We're not calling out the good and the bad. So remove that binary of good and bad. Just bring it up and let's talk about this. This is how I'm perceiving the process we have for exiting families from our program. I see a blind spot in this, and talk with other people in partnership and with good planning around these conversations. They need to be planned well so that they are brave spaces for people. Then you need to cultivate the space, because this isn't usually what happens in our organization. And then bring it up, elevate it, talk about it, and make it an ongoing conversation. Make sure that we can have this conversation again. You're not going to solve anything in one conversation or two, or maybe even three. You can definitely make incremental steps. We don't like this exit form. It feels closed off to us. So we're going to form a committee and we're going to start to update it. As simple as that, as you're thinking about the lens of implicit biases that may be present in our work. And I want to, again, just bring up the point of encouraging bravery over safety. Safety is an unsafe thing to offer people because it's subjective. And my school that brought in the officer friendly, their intention around that was to help us know that we are safe, that we have authority in our communities, that the police will help us when we need them to help us. But that didn't feel like safety to me. So my school was doing a good thing, a great thing, but it wasn't safety to me. You can offer bravery in your spaces, meaning that as people talk, as people share, and as people grow, they will be accepted and nurtured and helped along the way, just like you would want someone to do you, so that they can be brave in that space. Okay, so we have the 4 E's. Expected, let me move us back over here. Expected, explore it, expected, expose it, explore it, and elevate it. And now I want to give you a moment to think. So this is going to be some individual work. And then Mary, in just about a couple minutes, we'll go into small groups again. They can go into the same groups. We are going to have, oh yeah, we're doing good. Let's do 10 minutes for the small groups instead of 15 to talk about this. And what I'd like you to do is just to, as you're feeling the 4 E's right now, you can take some time to think about which one of them, if anyone in particular, speaks to you particularly. Which one is one that maybe you've done the first 2 in your organization, but 3 is where you feel like you should start, or where you are. Maybe you've done them all and you just want to kind of do some more work around it. Think about which of the ones speak to you particularly and why. And in general, how does the 4E framework kind of align with you and your work in your workspace? How might it fit? In what ways might it not fit? Think about that. And in just another minute, if you're thinking, you can kind of jot some things down. We're going to go into our smaller groups for 10 minutes, and you'll be able to share those things with your smaller groups. Okay, so about another 30 seconds. And then Mary, when you're ready within that time, you can send us to groups. And we'll see everybody when you come back. I will put the questions in the blast to the groups once you get in there too, so you can remember them. Welcome back. I was just sharing with the people who came back a little bit earlier that we're going to spend some time now really having a good, rich discussion among ourselves with one another. If you have something from your group that you'd like to share, or a thought, a comment, some feedback or insight that you have yourself, now's a good time to go ahead and bring that up. Again, we will attempt to just unmute ourselves and talk. If we talk over one another, someone will yield to someone else and we can hear what people have to say. So I want to know, first of all, let's start with the conversation of which of the 4 E's, if any one of them particularly spoke to you, to someone here. Is there one that kind of, that's the place you're at, or that's the place your organization is, or one that you're confused about? Who has one that particularly reached them? And I can share an example as people are coming up. For me, when I first learned this framework, or first created this framework, because I came up with it from some other study that I was doing, it was the explore it that really spoke to me, because I felt like previous to that, there wasn't permission to do that. Like I could kind of know it in my heart and feel like, oh, that's kind of funky there. But to be able to approach it with inquiry, with curiosity, why do we have this? What's it in place for? Because it may be a really important reason that this type of process or way we do things, or way we talk about things, or the ways we talk about our clientele, our participants, maybe that's there for a reason and really important. So being able to examine it with a lens of inquiry and curiosity really spoke to me and really gave me some permission that I felt like I didn't have previous to that. So that's an example of one of the 4 E's speaking to you. Who else would like to share something?
In our group, we talked about elevating ourselves, not being afraid to question ourselves. So, but then it got brought up that we have to have a safe environment. We have to have respect with the person we're having the discussion with, to then to have these conversations, because otherwise you don't feel heard, or you think, why am I even trying? How can I change the way that I'm thinking? And it's about self-reflection, elevating within ourselves, and exploring just the differences that other people may share, but knowing that you can come together to help with that. And one of the girls in my group was saying about, you can take a second for prayer, for reflection, whatever you feel necessary, to look a little deeper within yourself, because sometimes it's hard to, if it's an unconscious bias, how to get that then to be conscious. And then we were just saying that internal reflection is important, and just exploring that a bit more.
Oh my goodness, what great work. First of all, Crystal, you get the award for breaking the seal and going ahead. You get the party from Annette, and the rest of us are doing that. Thank you. I really am vibing with how you all took the E, the elevate, and turned it inward, elevating ourselves. That's something I hadn't thought of, and which brings to bear, like, do I feel brave? Do I feel safe? Who am I elevating with? That's exactly what this framework is meant to do. Even if it's self-work first before we turn it outward into our agencies or organizations or teams or whatever. So some really key points there you brought up. Thank you. Other things. Who wants to get the second reaction celebration?
My group, we talked about expect it and expose it. We didn't really understand. Maybe it's because we were just not comfortable with the idea. And that's kind of what we discussed. We get exploring and elevate, but I think the hardest part is to expect, because sometimes things become unexpectedly, and then exposing is like, if you're even comfortable to deal with the situation, and who do you talk to, and is it the right step to take?
Thank you, Esperanza. Wow, there's your little caring heart for that. Important things. And it's important that that was brought up in your whole group, and that those are maybe feelings you were sharing. So the idea of expect and explore are starting points. And so they can feel the hardest. And the to expect it is a little bit of a shift from how we're socialized to look at life. We're socialized to think the best in everything, and everyone, except for our implicit biases. So to not look for things that might be wrong because they might be too hard to handle, or we may get the feeling that if I'm looking for it, I'm going to find it. I think there's some saying like that. If you're looking for, I don't know what it, bad things or something, you'll find them. And so that I respect, and I want to hold that it can be hard to expect biases. I want to also lift that when I say that, again, we're talking about systemic things. So we're not even talking about the wonderful organizations that we work in as being places that biases are invented or nurtured, for example. We're just talking about the package that business in our society gives to agencies and organizations. So we're exploiting that out really big. And I think if you think of that, it might be easier to expect it because it's in society. We expect it in society. Our organizations didn't invent it either and didn't say, we're going to operate in a really crappy way as an organization. And so to think bigger than, if I find out that this is here, I'm going to have some guilt about working here. Not that. Like, I think there's probably a lot of stuff here we can work on, and I want to be part of who works on it. So thinking about expecting it. And you raised some really important points about the feeling of safety and bravery to explore things and bring it up. And if that space isn't created yet in the organization, that might be a place to start talking to people about, can we create spaces where we're okay if we bring up some things? Because right now we don't feel okay. That's that good planning. Great points you brought up. Thank you. We have time for at least two more for this particular question, one or two more for this question, and we'll move on to the general
Crystal?
framework. Yes.
Hi, this is Martha. I work with the WIC program, and you know, you go out in the field, you see expectant moms and new babies, and then when you come to the organization, sometimes they ask you for your input, and you're trying to make a change because you're there, you're seeing it, you work with it, but when you try to meet with the committee and bring the ideas, they stop there because they have to go to upper management. And being that it's a government agency, they don't go anywhere. So how do we unblock that power? You know, because it looks like it stops at the power and nothing gets done. And sometimes society pays for that because you do the work, you see it, but yet there's no changes.
Great point, Martha. Thank you. And there's your thumbs up celebration for even raising that. You talked about kind of the stopping place for trying to change or trying to bring in an expanded perspective. And you brought up government. And I understand WIC as it's a federal program funneled through the states. So to think about how you're going to make change in that is one of the main points about what we're doing today. I don't have the answer to how to make change on a governmental level. The answer that I have for us, which we're all trying to do, is how to talk about how to make change in your organization. So how does your particular WIC team start to have conversations about how to impact the work that you're doing? I know it's a hard concept and it's a hard answer because there is no answer. Or I don't have it. There's an answer, but I don't have the answer to how to get these programs. Some of these programs have been around for 40, 50, 70, 150 years. And they were formed in a time when we weren't having these conversations. Some of us weren't even alive, and we certainly weren't employees. And so how to get those things that are structured by society to change is exactly what you need to be talking about in your organizations. Some of our staff meetings need to talk about, we get this form from the Illinois Department of Human Services website. This form has not been revised since 2012. This form doesn't feel like a fit in alignment for the families we serve. How do we who do we inform about that? And you may need to have a committee. How do we make suggestions about that? And how do we get that to the level where that can be changed? It may be your alderperson. It may be an audience with your congressperson. It may be your local mayor, so someone in kind of that political. It may be letter writing. I don't know. It may be a combination of those things. But unless you work together in your organization to scan for these things that don't feel like they're fit anymore, and then talk about in a planful way how to change them, we won't know what that answer is. So Fantastic question. I wish we could bump right up to this sucks and we want to change it. Like that's where I live, but I know that I don't know nobody in the government level, so who can make this change? Not personally. So yes, great question. Thank you for that. As we're thinking, let us shift along a little bit to just thinking about the framework as a whole, because it does work together. The pieces fit together like a puzzle. So expecting it so that we're scanning for it, finding the biases that we don't feel good about, and well, we shouldn't feel good about any bias, but I mean, how much can we take at one time? Just a little bit. So exploring it and then exposing it, meaning we bring it up. Miss Martha, we say, hey, this is, let's look at this. And then we elevate it ourselves and it. I love how that group brought that in. How does that as a whole sit with you? Can you plan something around that? Can you plan an intention and invent a conversation, a way of thinking, a newsletter or something with the lens of that framework? If someone would love to share with us about, how you're feeling about the entire framework. I recognize we've been here together a long time. We may be.
Crystal?
Yes.
This is Dave. I have a question maybe that aligns with what you're asking with the framework of the 4 E's. One of the members of our group had taken the Harvard Implicit Bias test, and it was an eye-opening experience. It was a productive experience for her, and she encouraged us to be thinking about that. That seems like it's kind of an expect it and expose it, but I wonder in your experience where or how that fits in.
Oh, Dave, that's a great question. And there's hand clap for you. Depending on what audience that I'm presenting for in this work that I do, often when we have work time together, part of that work will be to go and do the Harvard Implicit Bias test. I've used it more often because it helps us see our own biases. I was absolutely shocked about my own responses, as an educator about this. I was like, wait a minute, what? And I took it a couple times to be sure. And it just solidified for me that I carry the backpack that society gave me. I would encourage everyone and anyone to take it and to keep your results with you, to use kind of, oh yeah, this is what this assessment said that I may be thinking, because that helps you kind of change some of your thoughts around your biases and your assumptions. So I think in that, the first part of a response to what you said, Dave, and thank you so much, is I think it's a good thing. And I think it can help. It's a tool in our toolbox. The second part that I want to say to that, though, is that in recent, literally just months, that assessment has come under fire, not unexpectedly. It's very hard for things that show us the ugly parts of ourselves as a society to take hold and get cheerleading, happening for it. But people have looked at the reliability of it as a research tool and said that, it's a small sampling, it's a moment in time, like all the reasons that it can't be reliable. And it's not a good marker of how we might be demonstrating biases or that we have them. I would say if we suspend all the ideas about like what makes good research and because that's based in supremacy culture as well, like this research is valuable and this isn't, and we use it for growth and development and consideration, to question, thank you, Mary, for putting that there, to have a reflection of ourselves, then it is a very valuable tool. And it can be the starting place to bringing it, like you were saying, someone in your organization was like, I think we should all do this. I think so too. It's a starting place to have conversations. It is not the thing that you're going to make any policy around. You're going to say, well, according to this, you're a team because you're biased this way and you're a team because you're biased this way. But to use it to say, wow, that really made me feel like this or made me think about that. I think it's important to do that. And thank you, Mary, for putting it there. I encourage you all to take it. It is an eye opener, and it just helps us to see this is the waters I swim in. I didn't wake up this morning and think, who am I going to be mean to today? It's not like that. So thank you, Dave. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Anyone else with something burning to share as you think about the 4 E's before we move forward?
Crystal, I'm going to jump in with a thought. Expose it is one of the things that jumped out at me, and particularly in the context of language. I think it's, in my experience in general, I think it's easy to use language and as a group use language that might contain bias, and we don't even realize it or intend for it to. So if we can become aware of that, I think that could go a long way as a starting point for some conversations.
Oh, Mary, agreed with you. And you get a hand clap for bringing that up. You bring up language, and language is such an important trendsetter in society. It's language that helps us know and keep the conformity to the trends of society. And we are in a time, everybody, that language is moving and evolving faster than it ever has in history, that a word can mean something. I use language in my work that last year in 2020, even, so we're in 2022, but in 2020, those were the exact words that we used and they meant something. And now I find out I use it and people are like, that we don't say that anymore. So language is moving really, really quickly, and to be aware of that and to harness that, like you say, Mary, and be able to say, let's have these conversations. Let's look at the scope of this language that we're using. So for example, on some of our forms, and I use the intake form because that tends to be kind of universal, an intake form or an introductory form or an application, kind of universal to the type of work that we do. We may ask for gender on that form and then circle male or female. Well, guess what? Language in the gender space doesn't work like that anymore. We may need to put gender identification and a line for people to write in what they non-binary or fluctuating, fluent, all of those different things. I said earlier here, thank you guys for everything. And I corrected that because that may be offensive. Thank you, folks. We're all people. So we can all be kind of people and folks. So Mary, the point you bring up is a great tool to use language to start to open up the conversation and expose it and think, how do we change this so that it feels more inclusive for everyone and anyone? Everyone. I don't know that we can ever hit everyone. That's such an absolute, but more than a few. Thank you for that. All right. Thank you. As you have more conversations, and I'm going to share my screen again so we can sort of move along to our time together is winding up. As you have more though, please do go ahead and pop them into the chat. There's your welcome back for when we came back from groups. So this is where we have, this is a general thoughts, comments, and questions. So the first one was around the 4 E's, but this is a space where we can generally ask any associated questions or questions that are kind of more general than 4 E's. And again, you can pop them in the chat or you can feel free to unmute yourself. I'm just going to look in the chat and be sure that we have addressed what's there. And I know that Mary and Annie are watching the chat as well. Okay. All right. Let's keep moving. If you have them, bring them up. We are not going to take this break because we just took a break and you did the most intensive work there. But I do have kind of a final video for us to think about. And again, this is in the context of our workplaces, how we work. So we're going to listen to some people or some animations of people, but the real voices are actually real leaders in real organizations and real employees having this conversation. So this may be a little bit of a model for you, and it's going to help us to think about more than race, but to think about another sector of our peoplehood that we have biases about. Okay, so when I get this going, Mary, if you'll let me know that it can be heard and seen, that would be great.
I would be amiss if I said I never have any biases. It's a conscious and a constant effort to avoid them.
There were so many questions that we had about whether or not working with people with disabilities would work.
When we first introduced the idea, most people would say, you know, I'm really worried about this. This is not a safe environment.
Because this is a restaurant, so I'm dealing with a lot of knives. I'm dealing with the hot oil, big equipment.
We have pressures and deadlines like every other place of business, so I had to look at my own concerns.
We were contacted by a job developer. She came in and she talked about the fact that people she represented with intellectual or developmental disabilities like repetitive work. And some of our work is the epitome of repetitive work. But even then we didn't think it would work because of the workplace itself. There are sheets of glass the size of a wall in your house. There are saws, there are punch presses that can amputate. It's scary for us. How is it going to be for someone with a differing ability? We brought in one person. She did the job perfectly. I mean, she did a really good job. And that's how it grew. It grew from that kind of real trepidation and real concern in the beginning of saying, this is really working.
I had an apprehension, to be sure. Having a son with a disability, an emotional disability, and ADHD, there were certain behavioral issues that one saw as a parent, oppositional behavior, that made for difficult parenting. Was I ready possibly to bring that type of behavior into the workplace that I'd seen play out parent to child that might play out employee to employer? And Jomar came in, and Jomar was a very shy, averse to eye contact, quiet, but presented well and went to work doing primarily data entry, spreadsheets. Became a very talkative, not too talkative, he wasn't disruptive, but became engaged and would smile and no complaints. In fact, the opposite. The fears and consequences one has about bringing your own home-based conflicts into the office, that didn't happen.
There are assumptions that we make that individuals on the spectrum sometimes are unable to pick up on visual cues, or they really don't have a sense of humor. And so one of the managers throughout the day, she kept referring, I'm just going to flip my lid. I'm just going to flip my lid. And one of the individuals on the spectrum said, well, we're not seeing that your lid flipping. And if that did occur, would that be off the top or off the bottom? And they not only got what, she was saying, but they were able to kind of come back with it. It actually had the whole room laughing, right? That's, some of the things where I said, okay, well, you're not supposed to do this. And I would say that we really have to kind of get rid of some of those assumptions, right? And while I might need an accommodation, doesn't mean that I can't perform just as well as a neurotypical employee, or even better in some instances.
The surprising is they are better than us because they follow the instruction. When I hire people, I tell them to make bread recipes. They will do, 1 pound of flour, 10 gram of yeast, and if there is 1 or 2 gram, it's less, we are running out of the things. They don't tell me, they just make a bread and it's not that good. But with these kids, if there is half a gram missing, they will come and say, I cannot do this because the half a gram of yeast is missing. I said, wow, that's what I need, I like to open a bakery that's only autistic kids can work. I just hire them.
You can't, in my opinion, in today's society, be a company that's considered a model and not have diversity and inclusion as part of your overall strategy and your commitment. When you bring in individuals that have a different perspective, it allows us to be better citizens, better corporate leaders, and also allows us then to provide services that support the broader communities that we serve.
Go ahead. Uh-oh. All right, so thinking about that, we're going to have some individual work time Now, opportunity for you, and this is something that I do. This is a little bit of a trademark of what I do. It's really important for people to have some time to just think for themselves. We've done a lot of group work, which is important as well. And just think about one way that you can really challenge yourself here in this arena. We've talked about a way for managing and thinking about our individual biases. We've talked about the 4 E's for being able to bring them into our workspace. So I'm going to ask you to take some time to do a little bit of journaling or thinking or writing. Maybe you want to write it out. Maybe you want to use a Word doc or just think about it to set one intention for all the information that you've heard in a way that you'll take it back to your own work environment. It can be personal for you and your work. It can be for your team. It can be for leadership, management, a department, agency-wide. There are no limits here. It could be as small as I'm going to share this recording with my team, or as large as I'm going to go back and start a diversity, equity, inclusion committee. It can be anything in your mind. And we're going to take the next 5 minutes for you to have an opportunity to think about that. I'm going to leave this slide up for that. Let me look at our time again. Yeah, we're doing fine. I'm going to leave this slide up so that you can do that work. And I really want you to take this, you know, I mean, not that you're not taking anything seriously. That probably wasn't a way to say that. Use this opportunity to really generate some thoughts and some ideas for yourself. And then we'll have an opportunity to share some. If you'd like to go off camera while you do this, some people don't like to be under the microscope when they're working, please feel free to do that. And we'll call you back at the end of 5 minutes. What were some of the things that you captured, even as you were thinking? One of the things I love about being able to do individual work is that I've come up with things for myself that maybe I hadn't had time to think of. So thinking about just unconscious bias, all of the content for today and ways you can connect that with your work and your workplace. What were a couple of things that came up for you? And again, feel free to just unmute yourself and share with the rest of us. We learn from one another.
I can share one thing that came up in one of our small groups, which was, I mean, it's kind of a bias too. We had one male group member, and we all agreed that it would be great to see more male educators in our settings or in different roles. And that was just a conversation we brought up, and we were all kind of in agreement about it, that it would be great to see something like that in our setting, because you know, it's all females, and sometimes the kids need that male figure in their lives, and if we're their safe place, you know, they can have a male in their safe place too at school.
Yes. Thank you. Is it pronounced, can you pronounce your name?
Lady.
Lady. Okay. Thank you, Lady, for bringing that up. And I love how you talked about it in terms of like, maybe this is a bias too. I have a question for you, just bringing that up. Is that something in your organization, in your workplace, that you might want to take back and talk about more? Because the idea that we wish that the people who identify as male were present more in our work and accepted more in our work is important. Is there something we can do about it or begin to work toward doing about it?
I mean, the group member that was there, he was actually an FSW for our organization. And I was like, oh, cool. I didn't know we had male FSWs, family support workers. So it would be great to see more.
All right. Thank you for sharing. And there's your celebration. Who else wants a celebration? Another comment, other thoughts?
I was thinking in the explore, the E's from the 4 E's, explore, elevate, and educate. We don't have, in my center right now, we don't have a lot of diversity, different cultures and different ethnicities, but we do have some. Maybe we can do this in my center, or maybe in another center. The representatives are here, but I'm thinking something like sharing about their culture, and it could be something like a tradition. We can call the families, or we can work with the families to share one of the traditions, family traditions, and make like something like a poster board or something, even online, like in slideshow, something like that, just to share and learn about them, because many of these biases are for our ignorance that we don't know, and we try to educate ourselves so we can address this. And if I know more about you, you know, maybe I'm gonna change my mind about what I think about you, and break that bias that I have, unconscious bias that I have about you, whoever you people are, you know.
Wow.
It's an activity that could be nice to do. I don't know how now we don't have. We used to have years ago. We used to have a parent meeting, and the parents were bringing some dishes to share with the other families, and it was very interesting to see dishes from different cultures and different even regions in the same country, you know. And everybody was sharing this. Now, because of COVID, can't do that. So maybe when we get out, then we can do that again.
Wow. Magda, thank you so much. You just generated a whole idea in a way, and there's your celebration for that, a way that you can bring it back to, you mentioned your workplace, and also maybe extending it into other sort of partnership workplaces. That's the first step. That's it. That's a first step, to bring the conversation back and talk about how can we do some of this work together. So wonderful. Thank you for that. In the last just minute or so, and I see another little face there that we want to say hello to. Hello, hello, little face and little fingers. Any final general comments or something that someone wants to say, or questions? Now's the time. I always like to leave a lot of time for questions and conversations, so we can do that, and then we're going to wrap up for the day. Questions, things you're thinking about, a final comment?
I have a final comment. I just wanted to say, I think it'd be kind of cool if somehow we could incorporate in pre-service doing this Harvard implicit bias survey meeting, perhaps with our centers or smaller groups, where we feel safe and connected, respected, and discussing those things that we found within ourselves through that study. I think that would be amazing, because sometimes we don't realize these biases, right? And first step is, yes, we need to explore it, but we need to discover them as well. So I thought that would be kind of beneficial for the agency and for everyone for that matter, but just a thought.
Great thought, Crystal. Great idea. Thank you. The idea of pre-service, anything, bringing this up as an education point in pre-service is super important. And I'm working with another group of pediatricians, actually, which is so weird because I am not a pediatrician and don't know anything about medicine, but the idea that they're trying to get these this education around bias and inequality into pre-med school, into pre-service at medicine, so that those ideas are already being brought up as students get there. So your idea is absolutely jiving with the times and the way we're trying to work with dismantling these things that are harming us all as a society. So great point you brought up. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? As we're thinking of them, if you have them, I just want to thank you for your participation. This group has been fabulous, because when you share, when you work together, when you are thoughtful, it makes the time go much more quicker because we have a conversation and you're not just looking at my head talking. So I appreciate that you generated thoughts and ideas and you were willing to share and brave enough to do that. If you have other questions, I am going to pop my information into the chat. You're welcome to email me at any time about anything. If you wake up at 2 in the morning and you have a question or a comment or something you thought of, go ahead and email it to me if that's your thing, if you get into that. I won't answer you at 2, but I'll answer you when I see it. So I'll put my information in. The other thing I'd really like to ask you to do for us, Annie is going to put the evaluation into the chat for us. And I'd like you to think of it, especially because we have 8 minutes left, as your exit ticket. It's really short. If you would click on that link and go and do that evaluation, it really helps us continue to plan and to know. Make sure you use the space that asks like, what else, or are there any other comments? Because you may say, I want to make sure we do a part 2, or you may say this was crazy and never bring her again, whatever. Just make sure you put it in so that we know how to plan for the things that you want and you need for your orgs. Thank you so much for your participation. Once you've done your evaluation, after Annie speaks, because she's going to kind of end us up, you will be free to go. Annie, the room is yours.
Thank you so much. So just a couple things in closing. I think first and foremost, I hope all of you will join me in giving a warm and heartfelt thank you to Crystal for what was just a really wonderful morning. So thank you so much. And I hope you are feeling a virtual clap and handshake and embrace as we close out this morning. I think most importantly, I just put the link to the chat, to the survey in the chat. Please take some time right now, if you're able, to fill that out. And it really helps us as we plan and look forward to future events like this. Crystal has just put her contact information in the chat if that is something that you want to write down and save in order to be in touch with her in the future. That is something I highly recommend. This is the second time I've had the great pleasure of working with Crystal. And as you now all know, it is just a tremendous and worthwhile experience to be in her presence. There are just 2 other things that are going to go into the chat as we close out today, and that is going to be the link to the Wheaton Warrenville Early Childhood Collaborative website, as well as the link to the Addison Early Childhood Collaborative website. In lieu of Mary Haley and I giving sort of a spiel about what we do and what our collaboratives do, we are going to let folks independently look at those websites should they want to learn more information about us. And so I'm going to put the link to my collaborative in the chat right now, and then Mary will do the same. And I'll wait. Okay, so mine has gone in and Mary's has gone in. So if those are links that you want to click on, I will give you just a second to do that. And that brings us to a close today. So thank you all so very, very much for attending today.